Welcome to Module 2, Lesson 2, Technological Innovation, Productivity, and Jobs. First, we're going to talk about productivity. What is productivity? What does it mean when I say a person is productive? Well, in industry, productivity deals with the output per worker or output per labor hour. So, Ralph takes thingamajig 1 and glues it to thingamajig 2 to produce a Wonder widget. So Ralph can make 100 widgets an hour. That is Ralph's productivity rate. That is the output per labor hour, 100. In 1900, an hour's worth of labor produced the equivalent of $1's worth of goods and services. Adjusting for inflation and all that other stuff, in 70 years later, in 1970, that same hour of labor produced more than $6 of goods and services. That's a 600% increase. And what's the difference? Well, the difference is technology and technological innovation. Think of the difference in jobs between 1900 and 1970. Let's talk about innovation. Technical innovations affect productivity by cutting down the time it takes to do a task, cutting tasks out completely, changing processes to make them more efficient and quicker. So innovation, we can cut down the time it takes to do a task, and we see this a lot with machines. A lot of times machines will cut out jobs completely, and then processes, things like lean manufacturing and fast food. Okay, we see this. Innovation will often lead to an increase in productivity as well as an increase in the general standard of living. And we saw this with Henry Ford and the moving assembly line. Once he could make his vehicles faster and more efficiently, he could pay his people better. I mean, his main concern was, I want to build a car that my workers can afford. Okay, so he increased his standard of living. However, a lot of times this innovation will lead to unemployment. So how do machines cause unemployment? Well, they take over tasks done by people, and they eliminate the need for people. So we saw this in communication, where the telegraph replaced the Pony Express. The line in printing, the line used to be people used to type by hand, and then the guy came up with this machine where people could sort of type it out, and that would set the type. So we got rid of a whole lot of people, and then now we have photo offset, and even photo offset we don't have anymore. The computer, you can actually say what you want on the computer, and it will automatically come up with a printout. So a lot of jobs were eliminated through machinery there. Automatic dialing replaces telephone operators. Once we can dial our own numbers, we don't need somebody to do it for us. We don't even have to ask an operator for information anymore. And in the auto industry, we see robots replacing people on the assembly line, especially in the paint booth. Innovations for machines also eliminate the need for tasks done by people. So when we had steam locomotives, we needed a fireman to feed the fire to produce the steam. Well, with a diesel engine, there is no fire. So you no longer need a fireman, and therefore you have eliminated that position altogether. So what happens when somebody tells us, guess what, you're not going to have a job because we're going to put a machine? Well, if we remember the Luddites, people get pretty daggone unhappy, and they're going to try to slow down that change to protect their jobs. Sometimes the government will try to step in. That doesn't really work too well. A lot of times there was a incident in 1661. In the 1600s, people used ribbons a lot on their clothes because they didn't have zippers. So they would tie themselves into their shirts and stuff. And that was a huge industry where people would weave ribbons. Well, this guy came up with an idea for a ribbon making machine, which would have eliminated anybody who needed to do it by hand. And the officials in Danzig got so upset with the potential of all these people being out of work that they not only destroyed the machine, they actually drowned the inventor. So that's pretty drastic, but sometimes the government tries to step in and stop things. Unions can actually threaten a strike. They can threaten to pull needed workers to help save the jobs of people who are not needed anymore. So, for instance, railroad brakemen. It used to be a time where you had a guy who actually had to turn the brake to stop the train. Well, when we went into automation, they didn't need that person anymore. I actually knew a guy who was hired as a brakeman, and 10 years later they wanted to eliminate his job. Well, the rest of the folks who were working for the railroad said, no, you can't do this, and in order to protect the jobs of the brakemen, they threatened to strike. Well, think about none of the railroads operating at all. And that would shut down a lot of things because we transport a lot of goods and services. At that time, a lot of people were still taking the train places. So that, and the railroad companies sort of negotiated and said, okay, we'll keep these folks on, but we're not going to hire any more. And this guy actually spent 30 years doing pretty much nothing and getting paid for it. But they protected those jobs, but eventually the job did go away. So one of the biggest things we can do is retrain for jobs that are actually on the rise. And this is what we see a main role of York Technical College. Here's my pitch for the college, right? But this is very important. It's very important to look down the road and see where technology is going so that we can prepare ourselves for either a job shift or to take over or, to adapt. And we can go back to school and we go back to training so that we can adapt and stay employed. There are times when increased productivity will lead to increased demand, which means that we're still producing more. So what happens here is that increased productivity from innovation means that producers can lower, get the costs of goods and services so they can produce things that are at a lower price. And a lot of times, to be competitive, these producers will pass that savings onto the consumers by lowering the price of the end product. Well, once you lower the price of the end product, what happens? Well, more people can afford it. More people who can afford it, what happens? There's a higher demand. You have a higher demand. What does it mean? You have to hire people to meet that demand. Okay? So, which will lead to more jobs. Now, we've sort of seen this. We saw this with Freightliner recently, where they were selling semis like mad, and they had 3 shifts going. But what happened is that they glutted the market, and it came to the point where everybody had one, nobody wanted to buy it. So what happened? All those people, that ongoing production stopped because there was no more need. But there are occupations where the demand will stay high. And so we need people to meet the demand. And these are going to be primarily at this point in the medical technology fields. So things like radiologists and med techs and physical therapists, where we got an aging population. And we're going to need these kinds of services, so we are going to need these jobs. The demand is going to stay high. There's a lot of times when innovation doesn't create unemployment. A lot of times, a technology will create its own economy and jobs. I mean, just think about computers. Computers have, that industry has added a tremendous amount of jobs. Not only people to make the hardware, to create and distribute the software, but ISP providers, and all kinds of stuff out there that there are jobs all over the place. Okay? And then there are problems that technology has created that we are actually having jobs in order to deal with it. So pollution needs to be cleaned up. The recycling industry, which is addressing part of the problems that we have created, has increased jobs, people to deal with that. It's a whole new industry, right? A lot of times technological innovations will lead to undiscovered markets. So the transistor, where we went from tubes to transistors in radios, actually has led to things like hearing aids and computers and cell phones and all kinds of stuff. So there's a whole lot of things that we could use this one innovation for, and that creates lots of jobs. Okay? Technology can create jobs by creating new products. So once we have electricity, we can have electronic appliances, right? Things like vacuums. It's really hard to vacuum if you don't have a plug to plug it in. Electric stoves. Anything that we run off of electricity is a product, has a product that was created by that technology and the jobs that go along with it. Automobiles, not just the automobiles themselves, but all the things that go along with it. Gas stations and roadways and all kinds of stuff, right? Computers, we just talked about. Cell phones, and incredibly expanding explosive industries. Um, Airplanes. I mean, once we could fly, we're using flight to get from one place to another. Businesses are using, I mean, business people fly all the time, right? Technologies could create jobs associated with these new products too. Not only do they create the new products and all the jobs that go along with them, but we also can create jobs associated. So products need raw materials. So we have to have people to work to provide the raw materials. So steel production will increase so that we can make automobiles. Products need support services. Online stores like Amazon. I mean, Amazon's great, but it's not going to go anywhere if you don't have someone to deliver the products, like UPS or, you know, the Postal Service or whatever. A lot of times, products will stimulate other industries. For instance, airline travel, once we can afford it, also promotes tourism. So I will fly to Disneyland, or I will fly to Rome, or I will fly to any of the other tourism destinations. You know, so that one industry has actually aided other industries. Will machines ever take over? Well, that's a big question. Some tasks are not readily adaptable for automation. Okay, it's not as widespread as people think. There is automation out there. There are islands of automation, but one of the reasons, some of the things that are keeping total automation from coming along is that people learn faster than machines. People can adapt and learn much more quickly than it takes to reprogram a machine. Okay, um, people relate better to one another. How many of you have ever called up and you had to have one of those electronic menu things, you know, and they'd have something on the menu that is not exactly what you're trying to do, and you try to talk to a human being and you can't. People say hit zero, but I think the companies have caught on to that. Do you want to go to a machine for a doctor? Okay, you know, do you want a machine to take care of you? That's a tough thing. I mean, people like to have, and people can judge from tone of voice, from facial expressions, where a machine can't. Okay. Even with advances in computers and robots and all that other stuff, machines still depend on people to create them, to program them, to maintain them, and to repair them. Now, if we ever get into artificial intelligence, I'm not sure how that's going to affect things. There are some jobs that are not going to be readily adaptable to automation. I'm hoping one of them is going to be medicine. I'm hoping one of them is going to be education. You know, these kinds of things that, you know, we like to think that we need that human touch. Okay, for next class, we're going to talk about products and services created by technological advance, how a shift in the overall structure of an economy affects technology and jobs, and attempts of government to assist workers who become technologically displaced.